Well, now, last night, Rishi Sunak did, of course, face questions from our viewers at our People's Forum in County Durham, where he answered questions on a wide range of topics, including immigration, the NHS and a little bit of tax cuts too.
Yes, the Prime Minister also urged disgruntled Conservative voters not to back Reform UK, saying it would only boost Sir Keir's chances of getting the keys to number 10, and insisted his economic plan was beginning to work.
Yes, this is despite fears the UK economy could slip into recession when official figures are released later this week.
So, how did the Prime Minister perform? Let's speak to... perform, rather, not reform. Goodness me,
he doesn't want that word.
Absolutely not. Let's speak to someone who is a bit critical of his performance. Peter Whittle, Director of the New Culture Forum, joins us now. Peter...
Hi, Tom.
You weren't a big fan of what the Prime Minister had to say.
Well, I think it was deeply inadequate and superficial. I mean, you know, it's a fact that this country, I believe, is fighting for its survival in all sorts of ways. And the way that he came across was essentially rather like a school head prefect. And what we really need is a very strong leader who basically has the guts enough to say and be honest and say this country is in a very, very bad way, but I'm not going to let it fail. I'm basically going to save it. We don't get that. We get constant justifications in this very technocratic way of what he has done, whatever that might be. I mean, you mentioned immigration there as one of the topics. In fact, it's extraordinary that when we have 750,000 illegal migrants coming to this country every year at the moment, that this wasn't even touched on. This wasn't even touched on. He was allowed instead just to talk about the boats and indeed claim credit for, basically for something which isn't even really his, which is that they've fallen by a third, the crossings. Far more to do with the weather that. We have 750,000 legal migrants. There is no plan in place at all. It seems to me there's no will to actually change that.
Peter, what could he have said to show that he understands people like yours concerns about the issue of immigration? You appear fearful about the future. What could he have said?
Well, I mean, the fact is, Emily, that, this is the most important issue now for most people in this country. And in a recent poll, something like 51% of people wanted a total halt to migration. The effect it's having culturally, economically, and indeed more and more politically is immense. So you have a Prime Minister here not even addressing that. Similarly, what you have is over the past, 2 months, we have seen on our streets very alarming hate marches. It's made a lot of people sit up and take notice. Nothing about this. Nothing about the growth of threat of Islamic fundamentalism, for example. Nothing about this. Nothing at all, for example, about the attacks which are growing on free speech. And indeed, what's going to happen under Labour is that, in fact, that will get tighter and tighter in the kind of legislation.
You make such a powerful point about what we've seen on our streets, about the culture in this country, about people who don't perhaps subscribe to British values. But if we look at those who came in the last 2 years, we're looking at over 100,000 Hong Kongers who fled communism. We're looking at over 100,000 Ukrainians who fled demagoguery. We're looking at people who share our values. If we look at the people who are going on what you describe as hate marches, they didn't arrive in the last 2 years. These are people who have perhaps come in decades past.
No, look, the fact is that what opened a lot of people's eyes about those marches is the fact that we're seeing the end result of mass migration over, for example, 13 years of Tory rule. I don't think that, even if we've taken people from Ukraine and these countries, I don't think it's deniable in any way, Tom, that in fact there has been a virtual borderless country now for this great amount of time. We are now reaping all the rewards of that. There's nothing from this Prime Minister at all on that. As I said, nothing about the growing threat to free speech.
Yeah, you're right.
It's quite extraordinary.
There wasn't anything about those cultural issues, but that's all we've got time for. Sorry, Peter. Great to speak to you. Peter Whittle, Director of the New Cultural Forum. Rather sceptical about Rishi Sunak, to say the least. You know what? I'll say it again. I think Rishi Sunak should have stood up when Mike Freer, MP, was hounded out of office for death threats from Islamist extremists. He should have stood up and said, we will not accept this intimidation from people who do not believe in our values.
Yeah, and I think actually Rishi Sunak, as the first Prime Minister from the second Prime Minister from an ethnic minority background, but the first of any recent years from that, perhaps has a unique position where he can say there are these things called British values, there are these things that we should all sign up to, no matter the colour of your skin. He is perhaps in a unique position where he can make a speech like that and make it very powerfully.
Well, return